Hello and very warm welcome to another episode of Legendary Leaders, the podcast. And I know I keep saying every single time I have another amazing guest lined up for you because they are genuinely amazing. And today, there's this one special person who is joining me, Darryl Stickel. He is, amongst many other things, the author of this beautiful book that you won't be able to see right now because of my background, Building Trust. And the subtitle is Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. And yes, it is a practical book about exceptional leadership in a very uncertain world. But you know what? He is an exceptional person, and we've connected ever since a few times. And every time I leave calls feeling more trusting, softer in my own self, more connected, not just to him, but also the world around me. And this book has had a tremendous impact already on my life, my husband's thinking and how he sees the world as well. And all those beautiful nuggets, those practical tools play a huge role nowadays in the work I am doing as well. So I would invite anybody in a similar space to get that book and have a look at those practical tools and methods. And to be frank, just amazing and insightful stories that Darryl is sharing so generously with us. But let me share with you some of the most often quoted assumptions when it comes to trust. And let them sink in. Trust is earned, not given. It takes years to build and seconds to break. You either have it or you don't. We hear these cliches all the time, but what if they are only half the story? As leaders, many of us carry unconscious beliefs about trust, like thinking it's a personality trait rather than a skill, or that it's only relevant when something goes wrong. Some believe being liked means being trusted. Others assume trust will just come with time. Well, Darryl is here to gently and brilliantly challenge all of that. As I mentioned, he is the author of Building Trust, but he is also a leading global expert on the subject and founder of Trust Unlimited. He's helped CEOs, soldiers, and entire systems figure out how to lead with more clarity, more courage, and a lot more trust in what's seemingly a far more polarized world. And his message is very clear. Trust is not fluffy. It's a foundational trait that we all need to build on a day-to-day basis. It requires consistent effort, focus, and intentional behavior. And in today's episode, we unpack what trust really means in leadership, how to stop eroding it without knowing, and why being trustworthy isn't about being perfect at all. It's about being consistent, clear, and, as I said, human. And yes, this episode has practical takeaways too, but also the kind of light bulb moments that will stay with you long after you hit pause. So here's your question to reflect on today before you move on to our conversation. What belief about trust have you been carrying that might be getting in the way of how you lead? What belief about trust have you been carrying that might be getting in the way of how you lead? Well, with this question, I'm going to say, let's dive in. Enjoy today's episode. Hi, Darryl. It's such a pleasure to have you back with us.
It's an absolute delight to be here, Kathleen. I'm looking forward to our conversation and to providing some entertainment, hopefully, for your listeners.
So I'm pretty sure there will be entertainment, there will be insight, and hopefully, I just said it to you, loads of light bulb moments as well.
Right.
That's my goal. Before I hit the record button today, you asked me, how can I be your best guest ever? And you asked me as well, how are you feeling about the show? And I said that I'm really excited. I gave you 2 reasons. And I said, I tell you one reason after we hit the record button. And here it is.
Yeah.
I ordered your book. right?
Ah,
And I have it in front of me. I have virtual backgrounds. That's the odd thing of people not seeing it. Now they can see it. Building trust. Here we go. There it is, this beauty. And what many people know who know me is that I call two places my home, London and a place in Germany as well. And this
right.
book was sent to the UK while I was in Germany. And so my husband brought it back for me. And my husband usually reads loads of business books that inspire him. You know, how to grow your business, mindset books, all of these lovely things, which is great. But this time he said, I unpacked it and I started to read it and I couldn't stop reading it. And I'm like, oh,
Mm,
how is that? And he said, who knew that trust building is so important? And these are the components of building trust. And Darryl, here's the segue to something you shared with me, but not yet with the audience. My husband has for many, many years or decades suffered from mental health challenges.
mm,
And he focused in particular on one key element, and it's called vulnerability.
right.
And he basically said to me, as a CEO, I didn't know this plays a role and that it is, quote unquote, allowed to be vulnerable and that this has an impact on others.
Right.
And that's where I'm going to pause and hand over to you. What are your thoughts, reflections, latest thinking on that topic?
You've surprised me and delighted me. Thank you, Kathleen, for that. Um, Vulnerability is such a hard topic for a lot of us because we get anxious when we start talking about it. I was working with a group at a mental health facility, and one of the staff said, I'm uncomfortable even talking about trust. Even the words make me uncomfortable.
Mm.
And so vulnerability is such a core element of trust, and it's ignored in a lot of the literature. Um, the definition for trust is the willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. And so it's got these core elements of uncertainty and vulnerability embedded in it. And 99% of the trust research just looks at uncertainty. And so without including vulnerability, we can't understand the depth of relationships. And a lot of what we're talking about now, or what I've been working on with organizations, is leaders realizing that they're not perfect and that they shouldn't pretend that they are. And so that little bit of vulnerability that we're able to expose to other folks allows them to feel safe doing the same. And so a lot of times when I talk to people about how do I build trust, we start with a little dose of vulnerability.
Mm.
And my podcast, which I'd love to have you on, is
Mm.
called The Imperfect Cafe. And it talks about people realizing that they're not perfect. And when a senior leader admits to not being perfect, and I'm not talking about sort of completely opening the kimono or saying, I have no idea what's going on,
Mm.
but I'm talking about little things, acknowledging that they've made mistakes in the past, that they probably will in the future, that they don't know everything, gives others permission to learn and grow and develop.
Mm.
Because if I come across as perfect or pretending I'm perfect, it tells everyone else that making mistakes is not okay. And that's how we learn, Kathleen.
Mm.
And it's particularly important now. I think that trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. I think it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. And we each have a threshold of risk that we can tolerate. And if we go beyond that threshold, then we don't trust. And if we're beneath it, then we do. And what that means is if uncertainty is really high, then we can only tolerate a little bit of vulnerability. But as that relationship gets deeper, the uncertainty goes down and the range of vulnerability we can tolerate grows. And in our deepest relationships, the ones we care most about, there's just a sliver of uncertainty and this huge range of vulnerability we can tolerate with that other person. And right now, we're seeing such fluctuations in uncertainty. Asking people to be just a little more vulnerable is a harder and harder ask. And that's why trust levels are so low right now.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, it's highly, highly subjective, isn't it? The
Really
level
is.
of vulnerability that we are willing to offer, to share, because it depends on so many factors, our upbringing, experiences, resilience, perhaps as well. I'm pretty sure you could add so many other factors. And the perceived
Yeah.
uncertainty, again, depends on so many factors.
Yeah. And this is why we need to be intentional in a way that we've never been before about building trust. And trust has incredible value. It allows societies to function. It allows organizations to be more efficient, more effective. We've seen that it leads to higher returns to shareholders. We know that it leads to better performance for teams. I believe it's one of the core factors that differentiates between leaders who are just okay
Mm.
and those who are exceptional, truly exceptional. Because those who are able to build trust develop teams that are willing to go through a wall for them. It's even more valuable now that it's so scarce. And you're right. The sort of perceptions of uncertainty and vulnerability are so personal. And that means we need to include other people when we're trying to build trust with them. We
Mm.
actually need to include them in the conversation.
Again, I was reminded of an experience. You also asked me earlier on, how are you today? And the one thing I
Yeah.
never do is just to say I'm good if I'm not. So I said,
Okay.
I'm okay. And you said, so you're not fantastic. I'm like, no, I'm certainly not. But to come to the actual point, I felt incredibly fragile this morning half of the day. And it would go too far and would take too much valuable time away from this show to share why. But I felt really fragile, spent a lot of the day in tears and feeling really sad about something,
Mm,
like a separation that happened. And and it felt made me feel incredibly vulnerable. And
right.
I thought about it today. I had a call with my business partner and somebody else who I really get on with really well. And I would say I trust both of them. And when they asked, how are you? I said, similar to you, okay. But I was not willing to go any further and to
Right.
disclose anything else, what was going on.
Right.
And it had nothing to do with I feel uncertain necessarily in this moment or the trust has eroded. In reflection, I'd say I just felt almost too fragile in this moment to go down that rabbit hole. And there are things that I just needed to digest for myself
Yeah.
and needed a bit of peace. So I sometimes wonder, where is this? I just like the word balance. It always suggests 50-50, but for the lack of an alternative, I'm going to use it. Where's the balance between, not choosing to be vulnerable in a moment,
Yeah.
because sometimes we simply need me time,
Yeah.
and, being vulnerable and enhancing and deepening trust?
That's a great question.
Well, thank you.
Um, yeah, this is why you're the professional.
Well,
Um,
you are in the trust business.
so you're bang on that our sense of vulnerability fluctuates and moves. And in that moment where you're already feeling really raw
Mm,
and uncomfortable, you're not prepared to go there with everyone yet until you've had a chance to process.
mm,
But I suspect that if you were talking with your husband, you'd be able to be more open,
mm,
right?
mm,
Because he loves and accepts you for all that you are. And you're not worried about his impression, and you don't feel like you have to explain everything to him. He's just going to get you.
mm.
And so trust is something that ebbs and flows. It grows and evolves. And there will be moments where your trust levels fluctuate, even in your deepest relationships, from incredibly high to just sort of high,
Mm.
right? As our uncertainty sort of bounces around and as we feel more vulnerable. And a lot of the folks who are struggling with mental health challenges or sadness or feelings of isolation, they feel so overwhelmed
Yeah.
that that request to be just a little more vulnerable feels like a cliff that you're asking them to jump off of.
Yeah.
And so in those moments, it's hard to have a place where they feel safe, where it feels like a safe harbor that they can just be themselves and that they can acknowledge that they're struggling.
Mm.
So it's something that ebbs and flows, and we need to have respect for each other. Because part of me, part of how I evolved into this work was that complete strangers would come up to me and sit down next to me on the bus and say, I'm really having a hard time today. And for some reason, they felt safe doing that. And so I wanted to understand why it was that complete strangers would just open up to me.
Mm.
And so when you say you're having, you said, I'm doing okay. And it immediately triggered for me. I'm paying attention to Kathleen. I care about Kathleen, even though we don't know each other super well yet. There's a connection there. And I want to get curious about that. And I gently do. And then you set up a small barrier, and I know I could try to dig deeper if I wanted to, but I also know that you don't want me to just yet. And so there's this art that goes with the science of pulling the levers to build trust with somebody else, but also respecting their boundaries, making them aware that I am willing to listen and I am paying attention and I do hear you and I see you. Sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent here, but
Mm.
I just want you to know that I care about you, even though we
Mm.
don't know each other super well,
Mm.
and that I'm sorry that you're having a tough day.
Oh, thank you.
And yeah, and amazed that you're still able to be so thoughtful and professional while you're having a day of struggle.
Thank you so, so much. And your presence to even pick up on these different emotions, these nuances that in this case I showed, is incredible. And I think it's something that's really needed in this world. Presence is the word for me, not getting too distracted by everything around us so that we can pick up on it.
Right.
And maybe not in every culture, I'm not sure, but I do believe digging a little bit deeper requires also courage to go there because
Yeah.
somebody may be opening up more and you may hear something you are not prepared for perhaps, or you don't know how to deal with, and this internal pressure pops up of I now have to help. What I experience with leaders quite often, I need to solve the problem,
Yeah.
which isn't needed, is it, in this moment?
I'm not going to solve your problem,
Mm.
right? The challenge that you're facing is not one I'm going to solve.
Mm.
But in this moment, I can be a positive space for you. I can acknowledge that you're an amazing person. You're doing incredible work. And that might not ameliorate the challenge that you're facing. It may not make it better, but I can at least not add to those challenges. And part of this is letting go of self and my self-interests for whatever aspirations I have for this conversation and focusing in on the other
Mm.
and just trying to be there for somebody, right? And when I talk about trust, I talk about sort of pulling different levers. And I said that trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. Well, if we want to build trust with somebody, we do that by understanding where uncertainty comes from and where vulnerability comes from, and then taking steps to reduce those. For us as individuals, there's three levers we can pull. There's benevolence, which is having someone's best interest at heart. There's integrity. Do I follow through on my promises and do my actions line up with my words? And ability. Do I have the confidence to do what I say I'm going to do? Those are three of the 10 levers that I talk about. And during our conversations, I've been trying to role model all three of those. Benevolence is actually being thoughtful about what's going on for you and trying to express that I care about what success looks like for you and how you get there. Integrity is that alignment of this guy talks about trust. Can he actually do it? And is he willing to set aside his own short-term interests for the better long-term interests of Kathleen and the audience who are getting to observe us having this sort of practical moment together? And that ability is, do I know what I'm talking about? And like you said, I asked you what good would look like at the start of the podcast, right? I
Mm.
want to be one of your best podcast guests ever. Well, that's me including you in the definition of excellence
Mhm.
because I can't do it on my own. And boy, if we could ask your listeners in real time, what are some of the best podcasts that Kathleen's ever had? What would Darryl have to do? That'd be fantastic because then we'd have a shared understanding of what excellence looks like.
Mm.
And so often we just assume, right? And we don't, I can talk about my credentials, I can talk about where I've spoken, I can talk about things I've done. But what really matters to people, I think, is my ability to explain this in a way that they can replicate so that they get a sense of, okay, this guy talked about trust, he talked about how it worked, but then he showed it during the podcast and he gave us
Mm.
hints about how to actually, those light bulb moments that you talk about.
And this was actually one of the side conversations I've had with my husband. By the way, I had really had to fight for that book to get it back, which was fascinating. And he highlighted, man, he has done quite a lot. And I'm like, yeah. And if you look at the education, Duke University, and then the likes of McKinsey that you've been a
Right.
part of. And I remember how I said to him, he's just such a likable, humble person. It's so lovely to have a conversation with him. And what's represented in the book is just what you experience. And I've told him that after we spoke for half an hour. It wasn't much longer
Hmm.
than that, right?
Yeah.
And and that's what was left with me. I admire all of your credentials, your experience. Don't get me wrong. But what stuck with me were the behaviors,
Right.
the presence. And that's something I
Yeah.
feel connected to.
Yeah. And I've accomplished things, I've done things, and that's great. But it doesn't make me any better than anyone else. It doesn't make me, I have a different perspective than most people. I see the world a little differently than most
Mm.
people. And that comes with a responsibility to try to help people, to try to make the world a better place.
Mm.
But I'm deeply flawed. I mean, I have so many shortcomings as well. Um, and this is back to that conversation around vulnerability, right? Like I'm legally blind. I wander the world with my guide dog Drake. Um, I've got post-concussion syndrome. I've had multiple concussions. Um, there's multiple challenges that I experience, and I need help from people on a regular basis. But I don't feel like it diminishes me either. I contribute as I can. I accept help when it's needed. And I have this experience of the world that fundamentally we're good people. People care about each other. They want to be able to show each other that, but we often feel uncomfortable doing so.
What could make us feel more comfortable?
It's a good question. Um, I'm lucky because when Drake and I wander the world, people see him. They realize, okay, this guy's legally blind. He may need help.
Mm.
Um, and so my experience is that people are so gentle and friendly about offering help. They ask permission. They say, "What are you trying to accomplish? How can I be helpful?" Um, and I experience gratitude for that. I think part of the challenge that we see is how people respond when we try to help them. I was working with a group of senior executives for this company, and I tell this story often. I was talking to them about benevolence, this belief that we've got each other's best interests at heart, that we've got each other's back. And I asked them to tell me a story about a time when they helped someone. And they go around the room and they're telling these amazing stories about when they put somebody else first, when they made a positive impact on someone's life. And the mood in the room is incredible. It's just
Mm.
buzzing. You can feel so much positive energy. And I said, this is fantastic. Now, if you could just explain why you're so effing selfish. And they said, whoa, what do you mean? And I said, you've just told me how powerful it is to help someone else, but you never let anyone have that experience with you. You never ask for help. You never admit you don't know things. You never let people see you vulnerable. And it changed the nature of that team because they started to realize it's a gift when I allow someone else in. It's meaningful and powerful for them. I bet you that half our listeners right now are wondering, what's going on with Kathleen? Is there a way I could help? And that gift that we give others, like people feel good about it when they're able to help the blind guy. I was standing at a street corner and some woman was panhandling, and she had this whole shtick where she was sort of mumbling incoherently and moving her head around and all this kind of stuff. And then she just stops and so clearly says, "Sweetheart, do you need help crossing the street?"
Hmm.
And I said, I really appreciate that offer, but I should be okay. And then she says, "The lights turn green now, you can go." And in that moment, she was able to help me. And it seemed to have meaning for her. So even people who are struggling would like to feel like they can be helpful to someone,
Yeah.
would like to feel like they're having a positive impact in the world. And we struggle to let them. And part of that, I think, is a pack mentality where the weakest gazelle gets singled out and eaten by the lion. Um, Part of that is this false notion that we're weak if we admit that we need help or that we show vulnerability. Um, the reality is it takes real strength,
Yeah.
right? To say, I'm going to be vulnerable, and if you misuse me, I'm going to accept the pain of that. And I'm willing to do that.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
so I think partly we need to practice. Partly we need to change the story. We interpret the world through stories, and I think we need to change the narrative around weakness and strength.
200%. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
And and I appreciate we are staying with this really important part of vulnerability for quite some time, but it is important. And again, before I hit the record button, you were talking about mental health struggles in men in particular, and being
right.
so caring about people. The big question was how can I help? How can I be of service there?
Yeah,
And and I would love to go into that topic a little bit more because I keep hearing about it more and more. And I disclosed earlier on, and I know my husband is okay with that, that he has been struggling for many years. And
yeah,
I remember when we started dating, the reaction to avoid vulnerability and getting too close to certain topics was I run away, or he runs away, better said.
right.
And then the trust had to be built, and it took a long, long time. And years and years later, we are at the point where he recognizes when I'm holding back with my vulnerability, when I'm not asking for help, and he's now challenging me. So the sides have turned almost.
Yeah,
But man, that was a path. And him coming home with your book and talking about vulnerability and how important it is and how he wanted to dive deeper into it to help others with it, that's a milestone, a huge milestone.
wow.
And, I'm so curious about your reflections on supporting men to open up as well so society can be more helpful.
Yeah, it's we're the tentative title is the Aspirational Men's Program, AMP. Um, and we're seeing that young men in particular are really struggling. They make up 80% of the suicide statistics. They are trailing in employment stats, in education levels. They are more likely to be isolated and alone, to struggle with mental health challenges, to struggle with addictions. And they are, according to the mental health professionals, the hardest group to reach because they're the least likely to reach out for help or to give signals that they're struggling. And so I think part of what makes them more resilient, part of what makes your husband's story so compelling, like I was getting goosebumps when you were talking about it, is the fact that he's managed to thrive through it. And he's found a partner who's amazing. And he's a CEO. He's been able to be profoundly successful despite the challenges that he's faced. And hard road can be a good teacher. I've gone through some fairly traumatic episodes in my own life.
Mm.
And through those, I learned, well, this isn't going to hurt as bad as that did. Right. And so it built up some resilience. It built up some coping strategies. It allowed me to be more open and vulnerable than the average bear. And it allowed me to figure out ways to talk about things that weren't quite as terrifying. And I think, there's a number of times I've seen the phrase that the opposite of addiction is not abstinence, it's connection. And part of the challenge for men in general is creating deeper relationships and multiple deeper relationships so that we're more resilient. So that when the hard times come, people are there with us, standing next to us. This is a challenge that a lot of leaders face. We're talking on the Legendary Leaders podcast. A lot of leaders struggle to understand, and when I ask leaders, are you the same leader you were 5 years ago? They'll say, God, no. And are you going to be the same leader 5 years from now? And the response is usually, I hope not. Right? Like, I hope I learn and grow and develop. But for us to learn and grow and develop, we have to step away from the things that got us where we are, that we're good at, and step into the things that would make us exceptional moving forward. And when we do that, we're going to make mistakes. And so the challenge for leaders is to be able to say to those they lead, I'm going to be learning new skills. I'm going to be adapting and evolving and growing. I will stumble. I may fall. My expectation is that you'll be there with me, helping me get back up, dusting me off, because that's exactly what I'm going to be doing for you. Mm-hmm. And so for this aspirational men's program, the goal would be to teach them how to build stronger, deeper relationships, how to control the things that they have control of. Because so often, I used to talk to my students about internal and external locus of control. Internal locus of control means I'm master of my own destiny. I make things happen in the world. I'm an actor. External locus of control means things happen to me. I'm buffeted by the winds of fate. And when I'd ask my students, I'd say, who here has an internal locus of control? All the hands would go up. It was a stirring sight. And I'd say to them, this is fantastic. This means that if you don't do well in this class, or if you fail, it's not me. It's not that the tests were too hard. It's all you, baby. And they would go, oh, wait a minute. I'm not comfortable with that. And I'd say, yeah, we have an internal locus of control when we're successful and an external locus of control when we fail. The danger for young men in the spiral that they're in right now is that they adopt an external locus of control, lose hope, and stop trying. What we need to do is convince them to do the things that they have control over, to get better at building stronger relationships, to get better at looking out for their own well-being, their own mental health, to find colleagues, friends, lovers who will be there through the good and the bad. Because that's how we build resilience. Yeah. Sorry, that was long.
That was powerful, though. And that also means that those people they find that come to them got to show vulnerability, because disclosing something helps again deepen or build and then deepen the connection so that they have an
Absolutely.
opportunity again to open up as well.
Yeah, it's reciprocal,
Yeah.
right? And the best way to get a man to ask for help is to ask him for help first. We're terrible at asking for help.
Yeah.
And you you've experienced that, right? And so um part of the challenge for us is to get to places where we're learning how to build relationships more intentionally. When I grew up, I could be an idiot multiple times in a row, and people were stuck with me. We talked about this before we hit record. Um, Now, if I'm an idiot once, people abandon me. Our relationships are a mile wide and an inch deep. And so I was able to learn those things. But with the way social media is going now, there's less opportunity to learn. People just find a blank space after they've said something or done something, and they're kind of like, what did I do? How did that? Okay, don't say anything like that again. And they're not getting the opportunity to learn.
Mm.
They're not getting it role modeled for them. We need to be more intentional. And that was the intent of the book, is to create a bigger megaphone so that people understand how to be intentional about building deeper relationships.
Hmm. Again, it's weird. A recent experience, Darryl.
Hmm.
Well, I don't start with the recent experience. Many moons ago, I was called a connector, apparently bringing different people from different backgrounds who are very different in their personalities together. And somehow
Mm.
they gel and really get on well. And only yesterday I was reminded of that again. I gathered our parents' network from our daycare, and I just sent a spontaneous message of, look, daycare is closing. Unfortunately, they didn't make it. They went bust, basically. And that means we are suddenly losing relationships, not just between kids, but also between parents and carers. And the trust that you
Mm.
have built suddenly starts to fade.
Right.
And that makes me incredibly sad. And I just sent a message to the group to say, you know what, why don't we all meet up at the playground, have a bit of fun together. The adults can chat and the kids can play and we have a good time. And there was nothing organized. It was just that message. And immediately people came in. Yes, we are in, we are in, we are in. And so we met and we spent hours of chatting and enjoying one another. And it was beautiful. And
Mm.
afterwards, I received some private messages just saying, oh, thank you so much for organizing that and for taking the initiative. I'm not saying this to blow my own trumpet here. I'm saying this because I thought afterwards, how come we don't do that more often? With
Right.
anybody, with any community that we are part of or individuals. Because from my perspective, we may get into our own way of, oh, people are busy, so I don't want to bother them. The stories we tell ourselves, right?
Right.
Or we keep ourselves busy with stuff, for example, right?
Right.
Everything else suddenly takes priority. But what was the key for me was the way I went home after. I was buzzing. I felt good. I didn't look at my phone once because
Yeah.
that just gave me so much joy, contentment, connection.
Yeah. And it's one of these interesting things when we talk about relationships. A lot of times they can seem deep, but they're really only on one dimension,
Mm,
right? We work together, or we are both fans of the opera, or
mm,
whatever it is. But when we start to have those connections on multiple levels, it creates more resilient relationships. And so the ability to show up in a different place, hey, we're just not passing each other at daycare. We're going to a place and being intentional about connecting and learning about each other and seeing where we have commonality. And now you've created an email network where people can reach out to each other to set up play dates, to set up family outings together
Mm.
where the group can start to explore different areas of interest and it has a chance to become more resilient.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing. That's a great story.
And I'm sharing this story because it's an everyday life story in a Western world, where these things can be initiated. Might we stay in touch, every single person? Likelihood is not. But every
Right.
connection matters. And to use your word again, a community has been formed that can
Yeah.
open up and offer support on so many different levels. And that's a
Right.
piece around resilience, but there's also a piece around feeling at ease with one another, sharing some joint pain, so to say, which you often have
Yes.
when you talk about raising children. You've done it
Yeah.
yourself, or you're doing it. And that is absolutely beautiful. And that brings us back to being so utterly human together and how much that matters.
Right. Yeah. And it's a skill that we seem to have lost. It seems to have
Yes.
atrophied.
Yes.
And, there's one of the things that I do whenever I do workshops or I do coaching or training sessions is I get people to take the model and practice. And so one of the things that I'll leave your audience with is one of the storylines or the sets of questions they can ask around showing benevolence. Because I think it's incredibly important and it can often be misinterpreted. When I talk to leaders and I say, benevolence, integrity, and ability, they go, well, I do all those things. And my response is always, says who? Right? Because if it's me saying it, it carries less weight than if you believe it. And so, what I would encourage all the folks who are listening to us to try is to pick someone to practice with. And it can be your significant other, it can be someone who's a colleague, it can be someone who's part of your friend network. But you start by saying, I heard this guy, Darryl, he was talking about building trust, and he said that benevolence is important. And that's just basically a fancy word that means having someone's best interest at heart, having their back. And I think I do that, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever experienced that?
Mm.
And the other person's going to go, oh, God, yeah. And then
Mm.
we get curious about that, right? We start to dig in and we say, what did you try? How was it misinterpreted? And and so we're starting to flesh this story out a little bit. It's a conversation we're having. And then we narrow the funnel and we say, has somebody ever really had your back? Like, have you ever experienced it where someone really looked out for you? And that'll again provoke a thought. And they'll go, oh God, yeah. I had this teacher or this friend and we get curious about that story. What did they do? How did it feel? What was the story you had about that? And now we're getting hints about how to be benevolent to that person in a way that lands.
Mm.
And we're priming them for the next step of the conversation, which is to say, what does success look like for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I was benevolent? Now we've created the opportunity for transparency because we interpret the world through stories. But if I say to you, you remember when you told me you wanted to get a promotion? Well, this is me trying to help you get there. This is what good looks like at that next level. These are the people who I have to influence. And so here's the impression you need to make on them. I'm going to hold you more accountable because you want to get that promotion. People are going to be watching. You need to give me the opportunity to spotlight you. I'm going to ask you to do more things so that I can tell people what a great job you're doing and how ready you are for that next role. Now we've gotten rid of the misinterpretations that sometimes come up.
Yeah.
And so your listeners can give that a try. I will tell you that overwhelmingly the response I get is it felt awkward, but my God, was the response positive.
You also take leaders, in this case, out of their usual habit to be goal orientated. You mentioned a
Yeah,
word that's really important earlier on, to assume
right.
and not build this clarity. So I am someone who is literally talking every day about clear communication. go into too much detail. There is not really too much detail. Ask questions, make sure you clarify and check in. And it's so important. And another element that I heard in what you were saying was constructive feedback.
Right.
Particularly when you talked about this promotion. This person may not realize yet that something else is required to get to that position or to that level. And what you just shared was there is somebody really upfront, honest, but with tons of care. So openness, honesty is something that is often spoken about when it comes to trust. What about that constructive feedback, healthy debate?
Yes. So I have a story about my sons. My oldest son wanted to get a baseball scholarship. And so I said to him, well, that means you need to eat well. You need to exercise. You need to practice a lot. You need to be a good teammate. You need to have good grades if you want to get a baseball scholarship. And you need to have good relationships with your coaches. They're going to be the ones writing letters for you and recommending you. And so now I'm nudging him about all those things, and he interprets it as me having his best interest at heart, not me nagging him about eating right and exercising and studying. And so the story he tells about that is a positive one, and he feels like I've got his back. My younger son just joined the Canadian Navy, and he was going off to basic training. And he said, I'm nervous because, we see all the movies where the sergeants are yelling at people and grinding them down and all this kind of stuff. And I said, yeah. I said, you need to remember, though, their sole objective is to help you survive. They want to help you survive, and they want to help the guy next to you survive. And so they are actually working in your best interest the whole time. And he said, you know what? After he came out of basic, he said, that story really helped me. Because I realized you're yelling at me because you want me to survive. You're actually going above and beyond. You're putting yourself out there to make sure I get it right. And so a big part of this is the story we tell ourselves about why people are doing what they're doing. And once they believe we have their best interests at heart, it's not always about being nice. It's about helping them succeed.
And with regards to this story you shared about the baseball scholarship,
Yeah.
what nuances make the difference between somebody who's perceived as nagging and somebody who's perceived as having their best interest in mind or at heart?
Yeah. Yeah. It's about setting that story first, right? And this is another one of the levers that I talk about, right? Because so the model starts off with uncertainty and vulnerability, which leads to perceived risk. And then that comparison of the perceived risk versus our threshold is the trust decision. And then we've got perceived outcomes. And the word perceived does a lot of work there because we can have exactly the same experience and have a dramatically different perception of what just happened because we interpret the world through stories. And as a leader, if I'm not actively involved in the creation of the story, I run the risk of 20 different narratives being shared, some of them cynical, some of them hopeful, some of them just clueless. And so I actively involve myself in the creation of the story whenever I can. And so for my son, it was always, look, you've said you want to get a scholarship. These are the things you need to think about. We also redefined what success looked like for him because he said, the team's not very good. It's a really young team. We're going to get our brains beat out. I said, then you need to define success around things that you control, that you can have impact on. And I said, so what would success look like? He said, well, it would mean that I did fairly well, that I was continuing to grow and develop as a player, that I built good relationships with my teammates, that I built good relationships with my coaches. And so periodically we would come back and talk about those outcomes. And he would say, we got just clobbered again. I said, well, how did you do? Well, I performed well, and the coaches were happy with me. And he made the All-Star team that year. He had a great season. There were a bunch of kids on that team that said he's like an extra coach. His coaches raved about him. I said, you controlled what you could control. You were a good teammate. You performed well. You worked hard. That's what success looks like. That's a good outcome. And so a lot of times we'll get to a place and then try to decide whether it was good or not. We actually need to be taking active steps to define what good looks like before we get there, so that we're all pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
So we've got something to measure against instead of an arbitrary thumb in the air to say, well, seems good or it doesn't, right?
Mm.
So we have perceived outcomes which feed back into our next interaction with that person. And so we've got this feedback loop. And in the middle of all this is our emotional states, whether we like or dislike somebody else. And so if we like people, we tend to look for reasons to trust them. We've got a positive story about them. We're more likely to trust them. We're more likely to see the outcome as positive, which can lead to this virtuous cycle. We like them even more. If we dislike people, we look for reasons not to trust them. We're cynical. We've got a terrible story about them. We're less likely to trust them, more likely to see the outcome as negative and to blame them for it.
Mm.
That sort of attribution of credit or blame, which can lead to these vicious cycles. And my research differs from most of the trust literature in multiple ways. One is it includes context, which most of the literature doesn't. It includes vulnerability, which allows us to talk about depth of relationship.
Yeah.
It includes perceived outcomes. The biggest piece, though, is that inclusion of emotion, because almost all the trust literature treats people like rational actors. And you've met people before, right?
Yes.
We're not always rational. And the more extreme those emotional states become, the less rational we are. And so we need to be mindful of trying to reset those emotional states before we try all this cognitive stuff. Because otherwise we're just wasting our time. And that's why some of these conflicts are so resilient, because people hate each other. And rational attempts to, or logical efforts to build stronger relationships just fail.
And to that point, last time we spoke, I asked you the question about having radically different views and beliefs in a room. And I asked you, is there a way to rebuild trust or even a basic sense of connection? And you said to me, yes, and I've experienced it before.
Yeah.
That's where I'm going to stop, because it's your story, but I think it's worthwhile sharing.
So I was working with a large corporation in Europe. I was doing some training with their up-and-coming leaders, so folks who are about to move into the executive ranks. And they said, wow, that went really well. We'd like you to talk with the board, spend a day with the board of directors. And I said, sure, I'm happy to do that. And then the day before, they called me and said, hey, the unions are going to be there. We've got 2 unions. They're both going to have representatives there. The leadership is going to be there. And I was like, wow, that'll be a different dynamic. Okay. And they said, just so you know, we went to court and have been in court with each other for the last 5 years, and everybody hates everybody. And I said, wow, you're sewing me into a bag of cats and throwing me in the river. And they said, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing, but we've got confidence in you. And I spent the day with this group of folks, and they started off very tense, but I explained to them how I understood each of their perspectives and walked them through the model, and we talked through the different elements of the model, and we talked about some of the grievances that they had and some of the frustrations that they had. And we talked about how they were letting each other down collectively on different areas of the model, right? Promises that had been made that hadn't been kept, promises that some people thought had been made, the other people didn't think they'd made them. So this mismatch of narratives, benevolence, towards the organization as a whole and understanding that there's an overlap in their interests and that we could actually focus on that. Conversations around excellence, what ability look like. At one point, one of the heads of the union said, everyone on the union side has been here for 20 years or longer. We've got this loyalty to the company, but at the senior executive levels, there's all this turnover. And I said, what does that tell you? I said, do you think the job sucks? Like, does it suck to be a senior executive for this company? It's a pretty prestigious company. He said, no, I don't think it sucks. And then he just stopped and he went, it must be a really hard job. I said, yeah, it must. Let's talk about that. And so we provoked an understanding for the different parties. Mm-hmm. And we facilitated conversation that they were struggling to have. And just being able to use the vocabulary, because it makes people less defensive. If I say I don't trust you, you immediately become offended.
Yeah.
And a bit defensive, and you start to think, well, maybe I shouldn't trust you. But if I say, I've got uncertainty, I don't understand what your roles are or what your constraints are or how you're constrained. I don't understand the context really well. Or you say that this is your values, but we see all this other stuff that suggests that it's not. So there's integrity gaps, or we don't know what excellence really means. Those conversations are much easier to have. And it provokes this level of understanding amongst them. At the end of the day, all three groups got up, came over, shook my hand, and said, it's the first time we've had hope in 5 years.
Wow.
And they successfully completed collective bargaining a year later without any drama.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. And so one of the downsides of writing a doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments is you end up in hostile environments. But I've facilitated a number of conversations between people who aren't getting along. And a lot of times it's because their stories don't line up and they're not thinking about the other person's story. And so a lot of times what I will do is I'll separate them and I'll ask each of them independently, how did we get here? What's the story? And then I'll bring them together and I'll say, person one, I want you to try to tell me person two's story. And it's an exercise that forces them to think about, hey, what would their story be? And as we work through it, person two gets a chance to correct misperceptions and to agree or disagree with pieces of the narrative that they think are right or wrong. And then we switch sides. And it ends up creating an opportunity to create a shared story that allows us to actually come to understand one another.
So in this moment, with this group of individuals, I assume that's what you have done, to listen to them individually first.
Yeah.
Because you said it was tense in the beginning. So first of all, they need to be heard and listened to. And then you bring them back together. Sorry, I'm recapping here. And share their second person or second group story, how they perceive it, how they see it. And the other group listens. You do that again. And the third point that I took away was then to talk about these perceptions and, refine them and change them and make sure we build some real stories here. And that creates mutual understanding, or at least a foundation for mutual understanding. You may not get to that point right away, I could imagine.
Yeah.
And the other point that I really took away was use the words that you provide in your work as well. So instead of saying, I don't trust, I feel uncertainty, for example, which immediately had an effect on me with regards to neutralizing the situation, more objective approach. It didn't feel threatening.
Yeah. Or I'm feeling vulnerable. Really? Let me get curious about that. What do you think's at stake here? How do we limit that? How do we reduce that? How do we make you more comfortable? Right? And so it starts to create conversations that we can actually do something about.
Yeah.
And, there are moments where I'm a pretty good guesser, right? Like I've studied humans for quite a while, and I've gone into places where people have said, okay, so this happened, this happened, this happened, and I'll say, so these are probably the responses you're getting. And they'll say, have you been talking to people? No, I'm just a good guesser. And when I was working with the unions and the board of directors, I was able at points to lean in and say, okay, so if I was them, here's what I would be thinking. And they're probably uncomfortable saying it because they're worried about how it's going to land. But I can say it because I'm not them. I'm an objective, independent third party. Yeah. And they'll go, oh my God, is that really what you were thinking? Well, yeah. Wow. I didn't even realize that. That was not our intent at all. Right? And so it gives us a chance to have these more difficult conversations and move past them. And it's getting harder, right? I mean, particularly in the US where there's such polarization. There's just a growing list of things you can't talk about.
Yeah.
And how do we engage if we can't have conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%. And we find now leaders, organizations changing words so that they can still talk about those important topics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that incredibly hard. And it is in the US, and unfortunately it becomes a role model for many other markets here in Europe too.
Yeah.
And the negativity and the polarization is spreading. So that's why I love to have guests like you on the show to demonstrate to listeners we can all take action. We may not be powerful politicians, and that's okay, but we can still make a huge difference if we get many, many people in this movement. I know that's a big word. To be present with others, to ask these important questions, to build real perspectives and create an understanding for one another.
That's one of the things I tried to do in the book was not just talk about the model, but talk about how to pull the levers.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all have the ability to build trust, Kathleen. Some are just better than others. And those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull. Usually it's the ability lever, right? I could come on your show and I could say I did a PhD at Duke and I've spoken at Harvard and they said I was brilliant. And I could say all those things. That's the ability lever, right? I've done this for 20 years. I've devoted my life and career to it. I could say all those things, but if people are more concerned about integrity or benevolence, I miss. And if I've pulled the ability lever in a way that doesn't work for them, you're easily labeled as arrogant or condescending or, unreliable or difficult to understand. He's too academic, whatever those labels are. Those who are better at building trust have multiple levers. Those who are really good have multiple levers and know when to pull which one. And so the work that Drake and I do around the world, trying to make it a better place, is showing people the different levers and teaching them how to pull them. And so chapter 5 of the book is about the model. Chapter 6 is about how to pull the 10 levers. And it tries to be practical and applied. I wrote it in a way so that if I go away, what I know doesn't.
And you underpin it with stories. And there's at least one more story that I would like to share for you to share with our listeners. Before we do so, let me just ask you one more question about the union and board of director situation. Because you said earlier on, one of the elements that makes your approach to trust and trust building different is the context. The other one was emotions.
Yeah.
Now, I imagine you're pulled into this room, a massive challenge lying ahead of you, and you follow your own process that you trust to get these individuals or these groups of people closer together. Now, I can imagine, even if you have the best listeners in the world sitting in this room, in this situation, when they had conflict for such a long time, emotions run high.
Yes.
And this is now the story I'm making up, that within a few hours, you might not be able to remove all of the negative and hindering emotions.
Right.
So when you were in a room with them together and then you made sense of those different stories and you reshaped them and built perspective, what happened to the emotions in the room?
So how do I say this? You people tend to like me, and it's because I like them. It's reciprocal,
Yeah.
right? And so I told each group a story while all the groups were present about how I understood their situation and how I empathized with them. And then I told them what I was trying to do and that I wasn't representing the union, either union, or I wasn't representing the board of directors. I was really trying to help them get along because it was so important for the company to thrive and be successful. And so I made myself a bit vulnerable to them first, and then I showed them benevolence. And I made them laugh a little bit. I told them interesting stories. I got them engaged. And then as I started to explain the model, I gave examples from each of their perspectives. And before they knew it, they were interested and wanted to understand. And they were getting a perspective that they hadn't had before. And they were being told, it's possible to fix this. And it's possible to fix this without feeling like you've lost. And that was a compelling story for them. And so they transferred those emotional states to one of, I kind of like this guy. He feels like he's on my side. And so it's that difficult balancing act of being on everyone's side in the conflict and having them believe that I cared about them. Um, and so they wanted me to succeed. And at the end, I did because they helped me. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. And you, I don't know if you did it intentionally or it's just now a part of your DNA. You've just role modeled so many elements of the trust building model in the story you've shared.
It's who I am. It really is who I am. I literally, my dedication is to my sons in the book. I want to make the world a better place for them. I want people to I want people to be successful. And I think our ability to build relationships is one of the key foundational pieces to drive success for us that we actually have control over. There's so many things outside our control.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that allows us to be resilient, allows us to be successful, allows us to thrive.
Yeah.
And I have to thank you for helping me get the word out because I'm trying to get the signal through the noise. So many people are talking about trust, but they're not talking about how to build it. And we can be intentional about it. It's a skill we can all get better at.
Yeah. Agree, and was really surprised about the stats that you publish on your website. One of them is 55% of CEOs think a lack of trust is a threat to their organization. I
Right.
was positively surprised in this case because I thought it was far less.
Right.
Because sometimes it's being perceived as the soft factor, and we need to focus on the hard factors. And it's one of those factors where I'm like, it is crucial because it drives what you define as hard factors.
Right.
Absolutely crucial. So that even 55% of CEOs in this research already feel that way gave me hope personally.
Yeah. Well, and if we look at the recent Nobel Prize winners for economics, they're the book they based their work on was uh, Why Nations Fail. And so they were looking at the factors that drive success for organization or for nations.
Mm.
And their findings were that overwhelmingly it was trust. It was stable institutions within those countries.
Mm.
And it allows them to trade with others more efficiently and effectively. It allows people to have the confidence that they can invest in their future and that that future will be healthy and vibrant. And so it has a profound impact on our communities, our society, our organizations. Um, so it's clear that it's really important, and it's also at the lowest levels we've ever measured.
Mm.
And that's a problem for all of us.
So if you were to let our listeners know about just one first step they
Right.
could take to start at least to, overcome this problem or improve it at least, what is one small step we should start with?
So we have a profound lack of awareness about who we trust and how much we trust them. They've taken that first step by listening to us today. Um, I would encourage them to go to the website and read the blog. There's a bunch of articles there. It's free. They can listen to some of the other podcasts I've done. Um, but for me, when people ask me for the specific, what do I do? I start with a small dose of vulnerability, right? Just share, don't scare. But admitting you need help with something or that you're not an expert on something. As a leader, we often reach our position because of technical skill. Those technical skills begin to atrophy the moment we sit behind a desk and take on a leadership role. And so being able to acknowledge that the people you lead, the more senior you become, the less direct control you have over outcomes, the more you rely on those you lead to reach your goals and objectives. So being able to say to those people, you're the expert. I'm relying on you. Or you're going to become the expert that I rely on.
Mm.
You're going to know more about this than I do. I'm going to need your help with some of these decisions. That small dose of vulnerability, followed with some benevolence. Just like I did with the board of directors and with the unions, that model plays out over and over and over again. And part of the reason I'm able to build strong relationships fairly quickly is I'm comfortable being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel less than because of it.
Yeah.
And I understand that it makes someone's day if they're able to help me. And it makes my day when I'm able to help somebody else.
Now I
I
know
hope that helps.
it does help. My cheeky me thought to myself, well, for me, it would take a bit of time to manage what you have managed with the board of directors and the unions. To be
Right.
the person who's liked in the room right away, who builds that connection, who is able to not let her emotions get in the way in this moment as well, which means, yes, you are truly selfishly focusing on the care for the other people in the room and how to
Right.
truly help them. But I loved the first steps. You didn't just mention one that you shared because they're absolutely doable. Informing themselves through the podcast, through your blogs, more about those levers of trust. And then really
Yeah.
starting with one. I loved the point you made earlier on with regards to think about those levers more deeply and how you can recognize them, but also step into them.
Well, then we can start practicing, right?
Yes,
I will
yes.
tell you, everyone who's listening can say, I heard this guy talking about trust, and I'd like to build a stronger relationship. So just pick someone who's sort of in the middle, not someone who's completely in love with you already, not someone who hates your guts. Pick someone in the
Yeah.
middle and say, I want to start practicing. I'm going to read this book and I'm going to start practicing pulling the benevolence lever first. And he told me how to do that. Here's the conversation. And then I'm going to pull the integrity lever, then I'm going to pull the ability lever, and then we're going to talk about context. We're going to have these conversations kind of once a week. People will climb on board. They will be thrilled that you want to build a stronger relationship with me. Well, I'm kind of curious about that. I'd like to know more about it. Yeah, of course I'd be happy to practice. And it's a set of skills that we can build. And people say often, it feels simple when you say it, right? A lot of people see the model and they go, this feels like common sense. And then they start trying to apply it and they go, okay, it feels awkward. It feels uncomfortable. It's a new muscle I'm stretching. But boy, am I getting positive results. I've got so many stories about just amazing results for people that I've worked with. And then they start honing those skills and making it part of their own vocabulary, part of their own presence. It's something we can all get better at. We can all practice. I just encourage people to put in the work.
So, what would motivate even the greatest cynic listening to us to invest some space and time and energy into learning how to truly build trust? What are some of those successes you have been able to experience?
So I worked with a father he was one of my MBA students in Luxembourg when I was teaching there. I got all my students to pick practice partners, and his practice partners were his 5 and 3-year-old sons. And he said he'd been away for most of their lives working in Brazil, that the relationship, he thought it was ruined forever. He said, I don't know what to say. They're scared of me. I always do the wrong thing. I lose my temper. And I think the relationship's broken forever. And we worked through the model. I did some coaching with him. At the end of 3 months, his final report was, everything has changed completely. My sons run to me. They throw themselves on me. They fight over who gets to sit next to me at dinner. He said, the relationship is incredibly strong within a few months. What are your most important relationships worth to you? Is it your spouse, your best friend? Do you want to get a promotion? Do you want to get hired? All of these things have a core underlying element of trust. And it's yours. All you got to do is figure out the model, read the book, start applying it. That's worth the investment.
And get in touch with Darryl if you get stuck.
Yeah, you can. They're welcome to reach out to me, Darryl@trustunlimited.com, or they can check out the website, trustunlimited.com. There's a picture of Drake. He's the director of goodness, the DOG. Um, and I am happy to be helpful.
Brilliant. The director of goodness. He is indeed. We are not quite at the end yet. And
Okay.
usually I wouldn't finish a conversation with a very challenging story. I'm choosing to do it because it's an important story and I want to turn it into an inspiration for our listeners. Because you mentioned earlier on, you have gone through traumatic events in your life. And what
Right.
still literally makes me almost speechless, as you know, as you notice, I am not. But what blows my mind is indeed what you have experienced, and yet you turn out to be one of the biggest trust building gurus. And I'm talking in particular about the story that led to you being visually impaired, that led to you having pain and experiencing huge pain. So if you don't mind to disclose a
Yeah.
little bit about that story, and most importantly, what this story led to, what was the impact of it? Or the
Right.
experience, better said.
Yeah. So I talk about this in the first chapter of the book, about how I came to become an expert on trust. A hard road can be a good teacher. And, I believe that my story is one of resilience. I mean, my father was a welder with a grade 8 education. My mother worked as a waitress, had a high school diploma. Um, I was 17 years old. I grew up in a small town in northern Canada uh, that was somewhat isolated, kind of harsh winters. People had the need to rely on one another. And I always believed that if I could be helpful, I should. And so I was playing hockey uh, in Fort Nelson, another small community several hours from Fort St. John. And I got attacked by a fan with a club when I was 17 years old. And he shattered my helmet, knocked me unconscious. Um, Apparently, I stopped breathing 3 times on the way to the hospital. Um, I had a severe concussion. And I went from being on the honor roll to failing everything. I had the attention span of a fruit fly. And I knew that I had a progressive retinal disorder growing up, and I knew that I would become visually impaired. And so I had intended to train my brain so that I could think for a living. And now all of a sudden I can't think. And there's this overwhelming feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. And, I'm struggling with night terrors, and I'm sleeping all the time. I'm just exhausted all the time. And we now have a better understanding of head injuries and concussion. But at the time, after a few weeks, they started saying, well, you should be fine now. Um, so you've got this chronic fatigue. We're going to check you for mono. We're going to check you for AIDS. We're going to check you for leukemia, anything that had fatigue as a component. And so I'm waiting for these test results over and over and over again. And it's a challenging period. And I go to college. I try to go to college, and I fail all my classes. Um, and eventually I transferred to the University of Victoria. Um, and they let me in because I write a letter saying, here's what's happened to me. And they have the kindness to allow me to come. And I fail all my classes my first year at the University of Victoria as well. And then slowly I start to recover. And I have multiple concussions during that interval because we just don't know about concussions. And so I go back to playing hockey, and I get knocked out again multiple times. Um, but something happens along that journey, and I would find myself sitting on the bus, and complete strangers would come up and sit next to me and say, I'm really having a hard time. So there was something about me that made people comfortable opening up, some level of acceptance. And I came to realize that I could have an impact on people. And I started going down the path towards becoming a clinical psychologist. And so I worked on crisis lines, I worked with troubled teens, I worked with families in crisis to try to hone those skills. And at the same time, I'm trying to understand what it is that allows me to connect so well. And, you know, I'm working at this drop-in center for street kids, and the CEO comes in and he says, you're standing in the kitchen and there's like 8 of these street kids sitting around listening to you talk. That never happens. What are you doing? And I said, I'm just talking to them and listening and paying attention. And so somehow through this process and through my upbringing, I developed a set of skills for connecting with people. And it was something about me, this care and compassion for others, this actual legitimate desire to see them be successful and thrive, that was being communicated somehow.
Mm.
And I went through an iterative approach of schooling and experiences and education. And when I got to Duke, I told them I wanted to write my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments. I've been working at native land claims in British Columbia, and they asked me sort of deep philosophical questions like, what is self-government, or what will BC look like 50 years after claims are settled? The last question they asked was, how do we convince a group of people who've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? I thought, wow, that's a good question. And that gets to the heart of these sort of long-term disputes. Why are they so resilient? Why are they so hard for us to solve? And so when I went to Duke, I was at the business school. I said, this is what I want to do my PhD on. And I had two of the world's leading academics on trust, who one of them showed up the year I did, the other one showed up the year after I did, and then left the year before I did. And they were the chairs of my committee. And when we sat down afterwards, they said to me, when you first came to us, we thought too big, too complicated. He never solves it. We're going to give him 6 months, and then he'll come crawling back to us, say it's too big. We'll let him chisel off a little piece of this, and that'll be his thesis. They said, 6 months in, you were so far beyond us, we just couldn't help anymore. All we could do was sit and watch. They said, here we are 2 years later. We think you've solved it. And from there, I went to McKinsey. And then on the way to a client site, I was involved in a car accident. I got another concussion. And it was the one that just didn't go away. And so I started a small company called Trust Unlimited, and I started applying these concepts all over the place, to financial services, to nonprofits, to the military, trying to figure out how to build trust with the locals in Afghanistan, to government agencies. And I just learned. And I've devoted my life to better understanding this, helping people better understand what trust is, how it works, and really importantly, how to build it.
Could we have had more inspiration at the end of today's episode? Here's a person who experiences huge adversity, hardship, extremely challenging experiences and times, turns it into a personal growth and learning journey while supporting other people, being self-reflective at the same moment, asking himself important questions to grow even further, experiencing more hardship, again, learning more. So talking about inner locus of control, you are the master of creating it, where many people, including myself probably, would say, I have no control over. And here you are, spreading goodness in the world. As fluffy as it sounds, I'm going to say it, and it's needed and it's important. So if anybody out there is still doubting their own ability to deepen connection, to build trust, to show up differently in your space, whatever that space and environment consists of, and whoever is a part of it, I think this story has just shown to all of us that we can make a step in the right direction. So why don't we reshape our locus of control and think truly about what we can do and what we might not be able to do? But let's focus on what we can do first. Darryl, any final words to our listeners?
I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to be here with you, Kathleen, on your podcast and to share the message. And I hope, I feel like I'm dropping grains of sand in the ocean. I want people to come alongside me and pick up great big rocks, because together we can make the world a better place.
Yes. So let's do it, as Darryl said early on to me. Let's create some magic. Let's do that together. And one thing I'm going to take away is, I share, I don't scare. That's a wonderful little phrase to take away as well. Darryl, thank you so much for being a fabulous guest here on today's show. It's been such a pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today, for listening in. I can't wait to hear what first step you all are going to take. So let us know. Thanks again, Darryl. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
And a good day to all of you out there. Build trust. Goodbye, everybody.